Welcome to LYLAS. If you grew up in the 90s, you probably know what that stands for. And this podcast is for you.
And here we are. We are at season 2, episode 16, or for our listeners who chimed in and gave us their feedback, this is episode 36. So thank you all very much. I can't believe we're at 36. Wow.
Woo. So exciting. I'm
It
excited
is.
about today's topic because I feel like it's a fun one and I'm vibing high today. So I'm excited to have something fun to talk about at the same time, not to bring the vibe down.
No, but it was really funny. Just to kind of share, Jen and I have talked before about how sometimes you just match a person's energy. And I think that we do that naturally sometimes without even speaking before or knowing it. And so we were texting each other just this morning. And just as an example, it's been about 2 months since I've had to be in like a structured environment.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that, for my entire life up until the last 2 months, it has been a very structured environment from school to school to school, straight from school to work to work to work. And now that
Yeah.
I don't have that kind of consistency, I was sitting in a chair for 3 hours. And I swear to God, I had to apologize to the guy next to me like 8,000 times because I was doing as much chair yoga as I could, like bouncing up and down. I was losing my damn mind because of that whole, you just get so, I was just juiced and amped and just not used to sitting or being still for that period of time. And then I texted you and you're like, I'm totally vibing right now. Great news. Big things happening. And I'm like, yes, there's someone out in the universe that's like me. Oh, and I'm glad it's you.
I know. I am really paying attention to energy lately and just like my vibe and what's going well, what's not going well, and really leaning into all of these things. And like I was telling you before, like the vibe is just high right now. Like things are starting to really show themselves. And whether you believe in manifesting or not, like there's something to, I've been writing down for, I don't know, maybe the last 2, 3 months, like writing down goals or wishes, just things that I want to put out into the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Like those things are coming to fruition right now. And it's kind of crazy when you think about all the things we kind of have control over. It's just interesting. It's funny how things are presenting themselves sort of out of nowhere. So
It
very
is.
exciting times here.
Yeah, well, and as part of that, um, I mean, and I guess on a similar thread, you've really had some things be speaking back to you, which is brings us to our topic for today, right?
Mm. Yep, listening to your intuition a little bit. So we never have like a plan for this podcast. We literally
Mm-mm.
text each other the morning of. We're like, "What should we talk about today?" And this just sort of popped up in my brain because let's see, what's today? Friday. So Wednesday would have been my dad's 69th birthday. So 10
Mhm.
years, 10 birthdays we've now celebrated without him. And I always post because we always sing happy birthday. And it's a good way for me to, remember him and have some like, have my kids remember him, those types of things. So I had posted and someone responded in my DMs and just said, "This is so sweet, but how do you get through it without breaking down? Like, how can you sing happy
Mm.
birthday without sobbing?" And I responded just saying, it actually brings me a lot of joy to do these things because it helps me keep his memory alive. I think if you've ever lost somebody close to you, one of your biggest fears is that they're going to be forgotten,
Mhm.
right? And that's not anything that, you hope for. And so by doing it, I feel like my kids, as they get older, they're asking a lot more questions about him. And I love this idea that we're celebrating someone they've never met before,
Mm.
but they really sort of get into it. And we sing very loud so he can hear us all the way in heaven. And it's a really sweet moment. I never get emotional really about it
Mm.
because I find so much joy in it. And then she responded. And so I'm telling her all this, and she responded back and she was like, "I know what you mean. We had recently met with a medium, and the medium had shared that we have to just kind of view them in this like really peaceful light and that they're happy." And she was like, it just really brought so much peace to our family. They had somebody pass unexpectedly. And I said, "Oh, I know what you mean." And so I had actually won a reading with a Hollywood Medium. Have you ever heard of him before, Tyler Henry?
No, and I don't know how I hadn't, but I just stepped out of that world, I guess, for a little bit. But I love the story.
Yeah, so I watched his television show. He reads all the celebrities. He's a very young guy. And I've watched his show for years, or had, back when it was on. He had a show, I think it was on MTV or E or
Really?
something like that. Anyway, it was called The Hollywood Medium.
Okay.
And he has read like the Kardashians, like anybody, any like famous person, pretty much. He's done a reading for them. And I always found his show so interesting because these people, a lot of them were skeptical going into it. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of it, they're like sobbing. And then it would interview them after. And they're just like, I can't believe all the things that were coming through for me. And there's no way he could have known these things. And so I was always very intrigued, like, oh, that's so interesting. I would love to connect with my dad, but like, what are the odds I'm ever going to be able to afford
Mm-hmm.
being with the Hollywood Medium and then also like get on his schedule? Anyway, fast forward to 2020, we're in the pandemic and I'm watching the show. It was on reruns on some channel, and there was a commercial that came on. And it was like, if you would like to win a free reading with Tyler Henry, go to the Instagram page and comment on his most recent post. Okay. And so I did. And I'm reading through all the posts before I decide what I'm going to post. And a lot of them are like, I just lost my dad, my mom, my brother. I'd like to connect. But, a lot of these like things. And I just got this idea to just try to put something funny in there, like maybe, something different. And so
Mm-hmm.
I commented and said, I'd even wash my hair for a Skype date with you. Pick me. And,
Because
you know,
no one was doing this during the
no one was
pandemic.
washing their hair during the pandemic. I mean, this was like height of the lockdown. This was like April 2020. And so, I put it down. Like, I mean, thousands of people commented, and he
Mm-hmm.
was going to randomly pick three people. And so, for whatever reason, my kids weren't here. They must have gone to my in laws. And so, Jeff and I had sort of like a date night. We had gone down to the neighbor's dock, had a couple beers,
Mm-hmm.
and gone to bed. And so, I wake up the next morning without my glasses on. And I just grabbed my phone and I had like a notification that said, Tyler Henry has mentioned you in a post. I'm like, no way, And
Could you
so,
believe it was that quick?
well, I knew that he was going to pick somebody, but I didn't know when. Like, but even still, I was like, no way. And then like I opened it and it was like he had listed like the three people that he randomly selected. And so I won a free reading with the Hollywood medium, Tyler Henry. And his person reached out to me and, set it all up. We did it via Skype, and he asked that I be home alone. And so my husband took the kids, and I wasn't allowed to record it, but he suggested that I take notes. He was like, some things aren't going to make sense to you right now, but take notes and refer back to them later. Like, things may make sense later. And so I was so nervous because obviously I wanted to connect with my dad, but
Mm.
also like I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if he was going to tell me like, like something terrible was going to happen. Like, I
Yeah.
just had no idea. I had no concept. I had never had any sort of reading like that. I have a friend that had done a reading with someone here locally, and she was kind of like nudging me to do it. And I had really looked into it, but had never scheduled anything. So anyway, I had a few like my dad's stuff around, and
Were you supposed
I,
to, or did you do that
yeah, he
independently?
did. Well, I watched the show, right? And he
Okay.
typically asks people to bring something, and he'll hold it like while he's doing the reading
Mm.
if they want to like channel like a certain person.
Okay.
And so it was very interesting. Then I got to tell this story because it still gives me goosebumps. So think about the night before my reading, I got a text from my aunt indicating that my dad's youngest brother had passed away,
Mm.
and it was a sad situation, unexpected. They had found him; he had been alone and passed away. And nobody knew about it. This wasn't something, I mean, I had just found out his family. So, it wasn't something that we put out on social media. Like, nothing had been mentioned, no obituary, anything like that. So, fast forward to the next day, I have my reading. And the very first thing he says to me, I've got my notes here because I had to go back and look at them. But the very first thing he said to me was like, I've got this man here and he's your dad. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, he wants you to know that his brother that just passed away, that he did not die alone, that he was there and that he helped him cross over, and that he knows he won't have a traditional funeral or anything like that, and that he's okay with that. And when I tell you no one could have known that information, I mean, besides like our immediate family, there's zero chance he could have known that that happened.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, I remember just my entire body getting goosebumps. And I was a little bit skeptical going into it. And I remember just welling up with tears because I thought this is
This
him.
is
Like,
it.
this
Yeah.
is him really talking through this man to me. It was wild. I mean, the whole reading was wild. He just nailed my dad's personality when he was describing him, and he was talking about this big smile and that he was sort of like this Rico Suave, like ladies man, and but that he was like a manly man, and just some of
Mhm.
the direct messages that he had for me and for my mom and for my brother, they were so spot on, like so spot on to things that had happened in our family and that honestly just no one knew about, like things that were never public knowledge. So it was really, really comforting in many ways. Like he was able
Mhm.
to answer many questions that I had just surrounding his death, and that he didn't suffer, and that, his health had been in a decline. And had he stayed here, he would not have been able to do the things he wanted to do. And he didn't want to live like that. I mean, just so many answered questions that sort of had been swirling in my mind forever, or since his death anyway. Um, and so it was so comforting. And I think that's what, when I think back, I'm like, it's not that I don't miss him. I don't really get super upset anymore. It's been almost 10 years. I don't really, like, every now and then I have a good hard cry, but
Mhm.
they're so few and far between because I see his spirit or his presence in so many everyday little things that happen, that it just sparks so much joy. I'm like, he is
Mhm.
still here. And some of the things he told me, like that he sees, himself in my son, and that he communicates with me through my son. And, I think I've said on this podcast before some of those examples of just how Jack will say things randomly out of nowhere. And I just have to laugh now because I know exactly where it's coming from.
Mhm.
And that is in fact him. He says that he watches over my kids like a hawk. And as a mother, that gives me incredible peace to know that somebody's watching over them, and that my grandparents came through, who I was very close to. And he kept referring to something, and it didn't make sense to me at the time. And I had written down, I have all these question marks around it because he was talking about something about like curlers in the hair, and he was like something about putting it in your hair. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I have like no idea what you're talking about, And he's like, well, just write it down, like whatever. And then I was maybe a year later, like going through pictures and categorizing them and putting them, and I had like a box of favorite photos, and I pulled it out, and it's this picture of me at my fifth birthday party putting these little curlers in my grandfather's hair.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, and I mean, it's just that I was like, instantly I knew exactly. I was like, this is what he's talking about. So many little things, um, but were so interesting. And it was very, very comforting to know that while they're not here, they're still with us. Like their spirit, is still
Mhm.
here, and it's still surrounding us, and it's still supporting us. And it really gives me a lot of strength in times when I'm struggling with something, to know that I sort of have like these big, bold, beautiful souls on my side. And, I just think that's the beauty. And I know a lot of people have feelings about, I mean, I think the Bible even says, like, not to consult with mediums. And I consider myself a pretty spiritual person, but it brought so much peace to my heart, and knowing that he's still around.
Mhm.
It was just such a really beautiful experience. I remember, you talk about vibrating. Like I remember just like whole body buzz when that reading ended. So many things.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, my brother's good friend that had passed away when we were in high school. My brother was in college at the time, but he came through in that reading. again, that was all like pre social media. I don't know that there's ever been anything about him um, on social media. And yeah, he came through with very specific details and a message, just things like that. That was like, it was just so wild
Mhm.
um, to experience it. I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity.
Wow. I mean, whenever you were talking about this and I guess the after effects of it, like right after the reading got done, like what did you do? Like what kind of state were you in? I mean, did you cry? Were you like laughing? I mean, did the
You
kids come
know,
home and get distracted? Like what was the next thing that happened?
I was like I said, I was like almost like I had a buzz, like I was
Yeah.
high, honestly, because it was like I had just sat in a room and had coffee with the people that I loved that have passed away. My grandparents came through, my dad, my brother's friend.
Mhm.
Trying to think, there were like 6 people, and they were all kind of like jockeying for his attention.
Mhm.
I have to go back. I had not looked at these notes since I took them in May of 2020. And I was looking at them this morning again, like almost buzzing at how many things have come true that he sort of predicted or gave me information about, certain things that didn't make sense at the time. But um, now I'm like, that makes a lot
Mm.
more sense. Those types of things. I'm trying to think if there was anybody else specific that came through. I think those were like the big ones, were those 4 people.
Mhm.
He did give me some like, career advice. He gave me some health advice, some things to watch out for. In hindsight, I wish I have since then, I would say within the last year, I started really digging, trying to find out who my maternal grandfather or paternal grandfather is. And like, I wish I had that opportunity to ask, just like, am I on the right track? Like, I've hit a lot of dead ends with that, and there's not many people around that can give me information.
Mhm.
And I wish I could reach out and just see if I could get some information on that. But it's such an interesting. If you've ever lost somebody you're super close to, I highly encourage you to just consider it, especially if it's something that, like a death that you're struggling with, especially a parent, a
Mhm.
child, somebody that just really has rocked your soul in losing them. It can, I believe, bring so much peace to a person in knowing that they're happy. I mean, that's the thing. My dad has this big smile on his face and he's watching over you, and he knows you have all the tools that you're going to need in life. And he's just really proud, like all of the things.
Aw. Mhm.
Um, and so, I think sometimes people need a little bit of closure, especially if you
Mhm.
lost somebody unexpectedly, like, my dad,
Mhm.
and his passing. Like, we obviously did not expect that to be the last time, last conversation we ever had. So, yeah, I just think that it can be such a magical thing. And I think that's why I don't have a lot of heavy grief. Do I wish he were here? Absolutely. Do I wish my kids knew him? 1000%. But do I sit and cry and, have a hard time talking about him? I don't. Um, I have a lot of peace surrounding that loss.
Wow. Do you think that you would have had that peace had you not had this experience?
I don't, because I wasn't
Mm.
convinced um, about some things. There were just, I had some lingering questions about his death. And um, I don't know. Just, it was sudden, and there were some things going on in our lives. And I just, yeah, it answered a lot of those things for me and just gave me like a real finality about like it happened the way it was supposed to. This was God's plan.
Mhm.
He's happy and it's okay. It's okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that really says something about you and your willingness to kind of reach into this and to just see what could happen because your whole life trajectory could have been different had you not, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Reached out, made that post, and then had that experience with Tyler.
I think I've always had I don't even know what you would call it, like fascination or just, I've
Mm-hmm.
always had a lot of thoughts about death. And even as a little kid, my mom said that I would constantly ask her about death and what happens. And, I've always considered myself pretty spiritual and sought out a relationship with God. Um, and so I just think that having had all of these thoughts about it, and then, when my grandfather was still alive, I don't even know how it came up, but we had a conversation like, well, if you die before me, um, let's make sure we communicate with one another. I probably insisted on that. And I remember specifically us coming up with this thing that he used to drink coffee all the time, black coffee, and I ate a lot of like baked potatoes as a kid because I don't know, I just did. And um and so we came up with this pact that if I died before him and he was drinking a black coffee and it turned red, that meant I was thinking of him. And then if I ate a baked potato and opened it up and it was black on the inside, that meant that he was thinking about me.
No
And
way.
if I don't eat baked potatoes anymore, I couldn't tell you the last time. It was probably when I was like 16 last time I had one. And he didn't die until like 19. But um, yeah, I often wonder, and I probably had that same conversation with my dad at some point. Like, if you die, like, I need you to communicate with me because it's always like something that I've brought up over and over again. I've just always
Mm,
been really curious about death and what happens, and all the things. I don't think anybody isn't curious about that
right.
or have some like healthy fear. I remember asking my dad if he was afraid to die, and he would always say, no, I'm not. I know where my soul's going, and I've lived a good life. But he would say things like that, and he really was not fearful of anything in life.
Hmm.
And so I just think that if anybody could find a way to communicate with me, it would be my dad.
Mm,
And so the fact that this happened and, in the way that it happened, because it's something that I don't want to say I manifested it, but I had thought about every time I watched that show, I'd be like, oh, if I could only like, I would love to know what he would say to me from my dad. And then it happened. Like, who the hell does that happen to? You
right.
know, I'm not that lucky. I guess I am actually pretty lucky, but yeah, just the fact that it happened was so wild to me. And then it, once again, just reaffirmed. I'm like, yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. And we were so spiritually connected that he was going to find a way to communicate with
Ah,
me. And now I see it all the time. It's humorous to me now. I'm like, oh, there you are.
hmm.
I just kind of laugh about it.
Well, and recently too, you said that you've got, I mean, the reading was 3-ish years
Three,
ago,
yeah,
right?
May 21st, 2020.
Okay. And even today, you're reading through your notes and you still find things that from that are speaking to you now.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I remember one thing specific was in regard to my career. And when it didn't happen, he had kind of thrown out 6 to 8 months, not saying that necessarily that's when it was going to happen, like 6 to 8 months from the reading, but he was like, I just keep seeing this time of like 6 to 8 months. That's what I had written down, time of 6 to 8 months. And I'm like, okay. And so after, in my mind, I interpreted that as something's going to happen 6 to 8 months from today's date,
Mm-hmm.
2020. And when it didn't, I was like, okay, like maybe he just got that wrong, right? Like maybe he's not great at predicting the future. He's great at connecting with spirit, but not great at predicting the future. And so I sort of like brushed that off and hadn't really given it much thought. And then, I went back to work about 6 to 8 months ago, and um, I recently had some opportunities come available, very much what he had sort of predicted in that reading. And so when I was reading it this morning, going back through my notes from that reading, I mean, I have like 6 pages of notes.
Oh my
I was
gosh.
going back through it and I got to that part. I mean, I literally lit up from the inside. I was like, holy shit, is what he was talking about.
This is
Like,
it.
I was interpreting it like it was going to happen 6 to 8 months from that day of the reading, but he's talking about my current situation. Like, it is completely applicable to what's happening right now in my life. And it's very, very exciting and also nerve wracking because it's a departure from what I've done in the past. As my role as a school psychologist, this is a different opportunity. And he flat out called, this is going to be a change for you. You're
Mhm.
going to be nervous, but you should do it. And I'm like, holy shit. You know,
Mhm.
like in my meditations, I've been requesting a lot of clarity, right?
Mhm.
And this morning I did a pretty lengthy meditation as the sun was coming up, really tapping into that and asking for clarity. And a lot of it for me, meditation is also prayer, and I just kind of like combine the two,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
in many ways. And yeah, and then I literally walked downstairs to get ready to go meet some friends for coffee and was flipping through these, notes from 3.5 years ago. And I was like, holy shit. So it's wild to me. I think that, certainly there were some things that produced a little bit of anxiety for me in terms, some predictions he gave about my health. Um, but it has also made me stay on top of appointments and making sure that I'm
Mhm.
paying attention to that kind of stuff. And so I think there's some beauty in that too, in that like I'm not willing to go 2 or 3 years without a checkup or getting things tested. Like I'm pretty cognizant of the fact that, he said you need to go every year to this specific doctor. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm
Mhm.
going to do that
Mhm.
because predicted this. And especially in light of like some of the other things that have come to fruition, I'm like, yeah, I think I will.
Wow.
Yeah.
How cool. What a
So,
powerful thing. So I have to ask then. So
mhm.
at what point did you decide to have this as like a topic of today? Was it before or after you went to your notes? Like what made you go back to the notes from your reading today?
Well, like that exchange happened yesterday. Like I was going back and forth in my DMs with that.
Okay.
It's a good friend of mine, her sister.
Mhm.
She had just responded to my story and she was like, it's so sweet that you do this. And sometimes I struggle with whether or not to put that on social media, but then I'm like, fuck it. Like, I think it's healthy to show that we still to show a healthy way of grieving, if that makes
Yes.
sense. Like
Mhm.
it's not all doom and gloom. You can keep someone's memory alive that you cared deeply for,
Mhm.
it all being like surrounded by sadness. And the posts I made are like my kids singing to the top of their lungs in front of like a birthday cake with
Yeah.
candles lit up. I just snapped a quick picture of them and they blew out the candles, just because part of it why I take pictures when we do this, I love to see them growing through the years. And
Mm.
but like my son is at an age now where it makes sense to him. Like he knows that they both know my dad is not here obviously, but
Mhm.
he has a lot of questions and he always has. And but now like whenever we celebrate his birthday, they're asking me more questions about who he was as a person. They'll ask me if I miss him. And so it gives me
Oh.
an opening to teach them about grief and how to process grief. And I think
Mhm.
that's beautiful. Like that it doesn't always have to be doom and gloom and that you're sad forever and your life ends too when someone you love is gone. Like, no, your life goes on and there's a way to honor their memory and really still be happy. Like there's nothing wrong with being happy. Like I said, do I wish that he was still here? 1,000%. But
Mhm.
it's okay to be happy and still memorialize him in some way,
Mhm.
you know?
No. Yeah,
And so
totally.
anyway, I sort of birdwalked there, but this exchange over Instagram DMs or whatever, and then her bringing up the medium, like I had not said anything. She brought it up about her recent experience with a medium. It sort of
Mhm.
triggered that thought. And
Okay.
I don't know, just I've had a lot of, like I said, just some real hippy dippy shit going on in my life lately. Some real like messages I feel like I've received
Uh-huh.
recently of just um, things starting to fall into place and make sense to me. And I don't know, it just sort of clicked. I thought this would be a great topic to talk about because people have very strong feelings about
Mhm.
mediums. And I think that it can really help people process grief. And
Mhm.
I feel like our mission and why we started this podcast was to support people and help people find joy and deal with the shit in life,
Yeah.
the yucks, as we said.
Mhm.
And so for me, I can easily say this has been one of the most profound experiences of my life was that reading with him.
Mhm.
And we've never really talked about that. I think I mentioned it on that episode where we talked about losing a parent, but never
Yeah.
really gone into depth as far as um, what was talked about in my reading. A lot of the messages that came through were not actually for me. They were for my mom, my
Mhm.
brother, which was also kind of cool that I got to be that sort of like vessel to
Mhm.
give them the message. You know, one in particular, my brother's friend committed suicide when I was in high
Mhm.
school. And my brother had always kind of struggled with that. He ended up naming his son after this dear friend of his. And the message that came through at first, I didn't know who Tyler was talking about. And then he said something that made it very clear to me who he was talking about. And he said, you know, he just wants your brother to know how honored he is that he named his son after him.
No way. That's what he
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. And I mean, it was just
Whoa.
those types of messages. You know, I think about that grief my brother has carried with him since we were, you know, since he was 20 years old. My brother's
Yeah.
45 now, you know, so I mean, like that grief, I was able to give him that message and
Mhm.
I hope that that has alleviated some of his grief as well, knowing that he does still see that he does know that Jason carries on his memory, those types of
Mhm.
things. And I don't know, I just think it's a really beautiful, comforting information.
No, I definitely do too. And I think that kind of tailing on to what you said, the goal of our podcast and talking about these things was really maybe in some ways to normalize a departure from the norm, you
Mm,
know,
mm,
and that we do all kinds of, like you, heebie jeebie, whatever, I don't know what
woo, woo.
term it woo woo, what, different things in order just to kind of get through this whole process of life. Um, and I think that that's okay because clearly what's not working for our society at this time is going through a narrow tunnel of
Mm,
expectations, of standards, of, having to do things the same cookie cutter way. And
preach.
yeah, well, I just think that reaching out into these areas and being willing to share and being willing to talk about it does help to just continue to break that departure from a norm.
Mm,
And I
mm-hmm.
think that that is just so healing and helpful and validating to so many other people's, again, experiences. And if the cookie cutter and the standardized thing is cool, God bless you. You know what I mean? You found your fit. And if you
Mm-hmm.
haven't, you've also found your tribe, you know?
Right.
So,
Right. As long as you're doing whatever lights you up inside and,
mhm,
you know, it helps you be the best version of yourself, which I think is what we're all sort of trying to achieve in this life, then it doesn't matter. You know, I feel like, you know, I know plenty of people that don't believe in God and
mhm,
don't believe in organized religion and will challenge me if, you know, if we get into that conversation. It doesn't happen very often, but I've had a few. And I especially when I was younger, I used to say, so what if I'm wrong? So
mhm.
what? If you're right, then nothing happens. But if I'm right, I have a place to go after this life.
Right, right.
And if it brings me contentment and peace to my soul, then who cares? Why do you care what I believe and what helps me process emotion?
Thank
And
you.
so, yes, I mean, I think it's just really getting clear on what we believe and
Mhm,
what genuinely lights us up from the inside out. Like that's the space that I'm in this part of my life.
mhm.
And you nailed it when you said getting away from society standards and what we've been, we're like undoing all the things that have been ingrained in us that you have to, you know, you have to pick a career at 18 and do that for the rest of your life. And then you're going to retire. And then you're going to have a few years of your golden age if you're lucky, maybe travel, have some grandkids, and then you're going to die. Well,
Mhm.
okay, that may be what some people want to do, but what if you want something different? What
Right.
if that career is not lighting you up from the inside? You chose that career at in your early 20s when we're all, your brain's not even fully developed at that point. So these are big decisions. And I love the idea of undoing what society thinks that, or what society has taught us that we have to do in life. I love this idea of having the freedom to explore truly what makes us happy and what
Mm-hmm.
we were put on this earth to do. We all have a purpose. I genuinely believe that we all have a purpose. And it's just you've got to find it and then be willing to go for it.
That's right. Yeah, you have to take that extra reach, that
Yeah.
extra stretch for it, for sure.
I'd like to think that you and I both are sort of walking the walk in that regard.
Yeah, it's good to have a partner.
It definitely makes it easier. Someone to kind of lift you up and remind you that you can do those things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think again, there's just I don't know that there's not much that you've said that I haven't done. You know what I mean? Or kind of like dived
Hmm.
into. Like I'm drinking the green juice. I love it. It's
I love it.
fantastic. Yeah. Every day. I love it. But I think it's that willingness I would, if somebody else would have told me to do that, I don't know if I would have. But since it
Mm-hmm.
came from you and that we're in the same kind of space and place, I just think it holds a different level of validity to it, you know? Um, but I just think it's having these conversations and then just being willing to do it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Just, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it is. If you heard that something that we've talked about has been helpful for us, just, I don't know, maybe give it a go. See
Yeah.
what can happen. It can really be very, very changing in a lot of ways. So what would you say then? Because not everybody's going to get the opportunity to enter a contest and talk to Tyler.
Yeah.
How do we find these people? Like, I know that they exist. I mean, sometimes, maybe they don't exist. I'm sure they exist here.
They
They just
do.
don't post about it as much here.
Well,
I'm in the
I
Bible
mean,
Belt. I'm thick in it.
well, so am I. I live in South
Yeah.
Carolina. Like I said, my friend Claire, I'm gonna shout out Claire because she's a listener and a lovely
Aw.
friend of mine. She had a reading by a
Hmm.
local medium here. And so, and same thing, like some things that came through for her were really, really touching. And I would say that she would say the same thing, sort of life changing in that way.
Hmm.
Um, I would say seek out. Like I think like with anything, there's gonna be quacks. Any profession, I don't
Oh
care
my
what you
God.
do, there's gonna be people that are not there for the right reasons. And you just have to do your best, look at reviews. And because I had very much looked into the medium that Claire went to and was going, I had even talked to my mother-in-law. She was on board, we were going to do it. But most readings you need to do alone because
Hmm.
you know what I mean? They're communicating, they
To
want to be able
you.
to get the message to you. And if you have more people in the room, it's kind of hard to decipher, I get the sense
Hmm.
from the research that I did prior to. And I mean, this was years ago. And so yeah, I think just look for a medium that's got good reviews or reach out to somebody if you know anyone that's ever had a
Hmm.
reading. And I interestingly enough, I was listening to the Mel Robbins podcast, big fan of that podcast. And I was listening to an old episode she had posted a couple of weeks ago. And she had a medium on there. And I was listening to it this morning and just listening to some of the things she was saying. She says everyone's a medium, that we all
Hmm.
have. Just some people have like a little bit more heightened sense to connect with dead people. And that's what she says on her podcast. But that's a great episode too. I haven't even finished it yet, but I'm only like halfway through. It's great so far.
Hmm.
But yeah, just kind of like seeking out that and finding somebody. Now you can do everything via Zoom. I mean, we
Yeah.
record a podcast via Zoom. Like you can Zoom somebody and have a reading. They don't have to be in your city.
Hmm.
So there's plenty
Hmm.
of them out there. I
Wow,
think really,
cool. Hmm.
but yeah,
I, I love every time you share stories about your dad.
I loved to just like to keep his memory alive. He was a good person. He did a lot of good in his life, and I think if you don't talk about him, you tend to forget those things too.
Yeah.
And I don't want to think about the end. I want to think
Hmm.
about all the things that came before that and remember that. So I love that this podcast kind of gives me a forum to do that too and share that.
Amen. Amen. Well,
Yeah.
gosh, that wraps up our October.
I know. Happy Halloween.
Right. Appropriately
Yeah.
so, perhaps, right?
Yeah, right? Woo.
Well, gosh, again, thanks for sharing that because that's a really personal story. I think it has a lot of vulnerability kind of attached to it and stigma or whatever else, but this is, again, what we're on here doing. And so
Mhm.
it's really cool. And it gives us more things to think about, more things to talk about, and just to kind of keep reaching. And I think just as one last thing, the fact that you've been so committed, which wasn't that your word of the year that you were focused
Yeah.
on?
Yeah.
Commitment,
Consistency, I think was my
consistency
word. Yeah.
to your meditative practice, just being so focused on getting clarity. It
Mm.
does seem like that this is, you're doing the work.
And
So,
it's starting to all really make sense. Like in the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing. I still don't actually know what I'm doing about anything,
no.
but I'm doing the best that I can and really putting effort into it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the bottom line. When you keep showing up for yourself and you keep doing the work and
Mm-hmm.
challenging yourself, that's a big one that I'm starting to realize. When you are pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, I think about how uncomfortable I used to be recording this podcast and even posting about it. Like I used to
Yeah.
just cringe inside, like, please no one listen to me talk. And now I can't. I mean, I love it. I love everything. I
Mm-hmm.
love when we record. I love putting it out there. I love getting feedback from people. I'm always
Mm-hmm.
so touched by that.
Yeah.
And so I just you have to push the boundary and try things, or you're just gonna stay in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody
You need
wants
to
that.
get
That's
that.
boring as hell.
Right, right. It's like a passport. Again, a passport from departure from the norm.
Mhm.
We're collecting our own version of stamps here along the way.
It's the truth.
Amen.
It's the truth. Well, check us out on our Facebook page, lilaspodcast.com, and on Instagram at the Lilas Podcast. Um, I think I said that wrong. The Lilas Podcast on Facebook, and go to our website at thelilaspodcast.com. If you've ever had a reading from a medium, we would love to hear about it. So please send us your
Yeah.
experiences. Let us know. I would love to do a follow-up episode and have somebody on that has done a reading and had just like a life-changing event. I remember saying like it was life-changing, and it truly
Yeah.
was because of the peace that it brought me. So I would love to hear if anybody else has had a similar experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. We're all about sharing and connecting here. So
Yeah.
give us a shout out. Let us know.
All right. Well, until next week, guys and gals,
Yeah.
Lilas.
We's out.